Right. Well, thank you everyone again for coming. Thank you to Rob Minervini for being here today with us. I'm super excited for this Clark Art Talk. Rob is a dear friend of mine and somebody I've been following as far as the art world goes for probably 10 years. And he's just lovely and his work is fantastic. So hopefully you all will enjoy the lecture today. A few kind of notes before we get started. I just like to obviously introduce myself. My name is Michelle Raymond. I am the director of Archer Gallery and Clark Art Talks here at Clark College. And yeah, it's been a fantastic year. We've been doing everything remotely, which has been a little bit of an obstacle, but also kind of this incredible opportunity for everything to just be online and for people like Rob and people from across the country to be able to share their art and practice with us. So there are some good things about it. Beyond that, I want to talk a little bit about our programming. Archer Gallery right now has an incredible exhibition up. It is called Calm Under the Waves in the Blue of My Oblivion, and it is by Yulia Pinkusevich. You can check that out on archergallery.space. So even our exhibitions right now are online, which is just kind of amazing as well. A totally different kind of take on the gallery experience, but also really, really cool. And then beyond that, we have 3 Clark Art Talks a term, and Rob is actually our second one of the winter term. So we have one more coming up, and it is Jeffrey Augustine Sanko. And he will be here on, let me see here, I think it's March 10th. Yes, March 10th for Jeffrey. So please come back for that. And then we also will have a workshop with Yulia Pinkusevich in conjunction with her exhibition on March 12th. So come back for that as well. And everything is on the website at archergallery.space. So just keep checking back. I record all these lectures. So if you want to refresh or if you want to share with your students, feel free to do that. Beyond that, if you feel like you want to talk or you want to ask any questions during the lecture today or afterwards, and you feel uncomfortable using the microphone, always feel free to use the chat. I see some people already kind of using it. That's always available for you. And then I want to say some thank yous. Thank you, of course, to the art department. Thank you, Lisa, who's been to almost all of these art talks virtually. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you, Ben, for being here today. It's really nice to see you. Thank you to all of the other professors for showing up and for all of your support. I also want to say thank you to ASCC for all of the funding that we're getting and support as well with our programming this year. Okay, so getting into introducing Rob. So again, thank you so much for coming, Rob. It's so incredible to have you here. A few things about Rob. Rob has an MFA from the San Francisco Art Institute and a BFA from the Tyler School of Art in Philadelphia. His work has been exhibited nationally, including solo shows with Hirschl Adler in New York City, Edward Cella Gallery in LA, Rena Bransten Gallery in San Francisco, as well as group and 2-person exhibitions with the San Jose Museum of Art, Torrance Art Museum, the Museum of Contemporary Art, San Diego, the Rosa Center for Contemporary Art. I saw that show, it was fantastic. Palo Alto Art Center, Schneider Museum of Art, and the Yerba Buena Center for the Arts. Lots and lots of fantastic places to have seen Rob's work. And then beyond these exhibitions, Rob has completed murals and large-scale art commissions with the San Francisco Arts Commission, the Alameda County Arts Commission, and the Philadelphia Mural Arts Program, with an incredible mosaic mural at SFO Airport, which I can't wait to see, but have not traveled through there since COVID times. But I'm really excited. It looks fantastic, you know, on the screen. So I imagine it's just an incredible piece in person. Rob's work has been published in New American Paintings and Beautiful Decay, and has been reviewed in the LA Times, Modern Painters, San Francisco Chronicle, Art Limited magazine, and featured in Art Week LA, 7x7 magazine, and the Huffington Post. So it is my pleasure to introduce Rob Minervini and have him give an art talk today as part of our Clark Art Talk programs. So thank you. Help me introduce, or help me welcome him in. Thanks, Rob.
Thank you, Michelle.
Yes.
Thank you, Clark College, for having me. It's really a pleasure to be here. All good?
Yes, I'm gonna pin you real quick. Sorry. There you go.
Oh, sure. Okay. Yeah,
you're good to go.
the required glitch here and there.
Yes.
Wonderful to be here with you guys. Thanks so much for having me again. Excited to be here and talk to you about my work a bit. It's also, this is probably the coziest art talk I've ever given, and that I'm just in my studio. So just to give you a kind of quick overview, I'm planning on doing a bit of a slideshow talking about my work from grad school onwards. So it's 2009 to now, which is a long period of time. So what I'm going to do is just kind of skim through different bodies of work fairly swiftly, hopefully. And if you have questions along the way, as Michelle mentioned, just feel free to put them in the chat. And then I'm going to, since we're in my studio, I thought it was a good opportunity to show you what I'm working on right now and talk a little bit about the processes and projects that I'm working on. And so it can be kind of like a mini studio visit / art talk. And then of course, questions at the end. So I'll just kind of dive in. So let's see, I'll do this quick screen share. Let's see here. Okay, hold share. Okay, this is not my work. This is Frederick Church. This is, part of the Hudson River School of Art that is basically, you can kind of view it as the first kind of purely American stylistic historical art movement. And, it's really this idea of defining America and its landscape through the lens of a viewer looking out onto a landscape, right? It's usually the viewer is the one positioned as to looking out into the space. There's also the differences in European traditions that are, typically landscape as being a sort of secondary subject. I mean, you can look at some Northern European Dutch traditions that start to take the landscape on, or people like Turner or in England. But I used this as a starting point for the talk and just for the body of work that I'm going to start with, which is my first, graduate show. This is my SFAI graduate show in 2009, and that the parallels I was trying to draw between historical movements and contemporizing them in some way is, one aspect of how I think about my work and what I'm interested in conveying. So, that is to say that I try to place my work in a historical context, a contemporary context, and also trying to look towards the future in terms of putting my work into a dialogue. And these are two large-scale paintings. The subject matter is both revolving around nature, but also the sort of man-made landscape. And this is something that comes in and out of my work over the years. But it has had a lot of influence on my work as it's developed, in that it's a theme and subject matter that I come back to quite a bit. It's this dichotomy between sort of nature and humanity, or nature and culture. And I will kind of go through different bodies of work, which more or less look at different, I think anyway, look at this subject matter in different regards. And it started in this culmination of grad school work that had to do with landscape, thinking about these sort of grandiose early American landscapes and contextualizing them in acrylic paint, using very hyper-natural colors, playing a lot with how paint is applied, thinking about using acrylic in its many different capacities. The paint is being dripped, it's being stenciled, it's being poured on, or like puff paint put applications, and then hand painting with a brush, etc. So I was really thinking about how materiality informs how one views the painting, and how these spaces can be kind of complicated. This is a still from the film Sleeper from 1973. I was watching a lot of sci-fi at the time. I've always been really interested in science fiction. And part of these stills that I was taking from films that I was watching, you know, circled around also theoretical, or I guess you could call it hypothetical architectural, that was also a subject that I've been very interested in. With this is Buckmaster Fuller's proposal for a dome over Manhattan. I just love how these sort of utopian ideals were being explored in the 60s, 70s, 80s onward, through practical means, through architecture and through spatial, you know, often just images, so that they would never actually happen. Maybe there was an aspiration for them to happen, but they might also just exist as images. And I loved this source of inspiration. I also loved how, you know, I took it out of this slideshow, but I often show a clip from Logan's Run, which was a 80s sci-fi film where they, you know, they exist in these geodesic domes, so you see this crossover between, you know, theoretical or hypothetical architecture, utopian idealism, and dystopian idealism, right? Or dystopian visions of the future, which come through sci-fi, and you know, you can you know, plays that sort of artistic or imaginative perspective in filmmaking, art history, et cetera. So these kind of references found a way into my work. This was back in, so if the first paintings were showing was around 2009, excuse me, this was 2011. This was a big show for me at the Yerba Buena Center for the Arts. They do a triannual exhibition, which is kind of meant to be a survey of Bay Area artists, called Bay Area Now. I was very fortunate to be included in it. And part of my contribution to that show were these three large-scale paintings, which included a lot of influences of the sort that I just mentioned, and were a bit of a shift in the work, also in that their landscape in their utilitarianism, and that you are a viewer looking out into a space, but you are sort of looking from a window inside, looking out, is in sort of a theme in the work. So sort of positioning the work in that regard of as opposed to being outdoors. So it's just as a sort of lens shift or viewer shift. And these are all acrylic, again, just really exploring the ways in paints applied, using spray paint, stenciling, hand painting. This is a 5x10 foot painting. And I think this was around 2000. I think it was roughly after that show. It was another. This was a couple of smaller paintings in my first show in Los Angeles at a gallery that was called. They've since closed, but it was called Marine Contemporary Gallery. And I continued this theme, sort of looking outward, and found myself making these small floral still life paintings. And just to give you kind of a view into the mindset, what I was thinking about was this: if I'm going to be painting floral still lives, you know, I kind of vacillate between sort of like analytical thinking and sort of more emotive reasoning or emotive influences. So it's sort of, which I think we all do to some extent, but I was kind of thinking, I found myself gravitating towards this subject matter. And I was thinking about, if I'm going to be painting this type of subject matter, what does it really mean, and how do the sort of politics of a subject matter find its way into the work? So I think, you know, I'm typically interested in, you know, a historical context, a materiality, the question of materiality, and then the question of the sort of political, like, what is this work doing? You know, what does it make you think about? What does it make you intent? What's the intent behind it? And, you know, lastly, sort of, what does it make you feel? You know, what does it evoke? So there's sort of a way of putting these things together in questions to yourself that hopefully bear out some fruit in the artwork itself. So, you know, I was led to thinking about these Rachel Reusch paintings from the, you know, 16 to 1700s. And, you know, floral paintings are pretty, you know, cliche in a lot of ways, right? And I know I personally don't, prior to this, hadn't thought about them very deeply, other than they're you know, a trope that you've seen a million times. And, you know, doing more research into the artist, you know, you learn that the economic situation in which she was living in had, and the subject matter she was painting kind of coincided in this really bizarre, interesting way. And that there was, you know, colonialism was really, you know, thriving at this point. And the floral options that she had a lot to do with the reach of the Dutch Empire. So the flowers that were coming back to where she lived were exotic and from different parts of the world that only really she had access to because of this sort of colonial and capitalist, but this colonial kind of, you know, movement that was happening at the time. So, you know, if you can think about them as just pretty flowers, or you can think about them as a sort of like portrait of colonialism in a moment in time. So I may really think about sort of like what a flower can say in that regard. And then it led me to this body of work, which you can see this sort of, so this is a still life. It's you know, continuing this theme of sort of like from a window looking out. But I was populating these paintings with endangered California flora and fauna. So I was kind of thinking about the memento mori of a still life from this Rachel Royce time in history, which was, you know, that term refers to the meditation on time, life, and death, sort of cyclical nature of life and death in these still lives, where, you know, you often see like a half-eaten meal or like rotting fruit and flowers or something like that. And then tying it to this sort of real idea of animals that are going extinct and flowers that are endangered. And there's always kind of been an environmental and sort of, particularly, I guess, about climate change and things like that. That's, you know, an issue that I kind of either hint at or directly try to reference in the work in this regard. This is sort of a direct reference. And so these are, you know, these are probably the most intricate paintings I've made. You know, there's a ton of layering. I didn't mention too much technical stuff in the last couple of pieces I showed, but, you know, there's a lot of, you know, kind of spray painting and then hand painting. I'm often, in some of these, I'm like pouring paint onto a palette and then letting it dry and then cutting it out and collaging it on top of the parts, so that when you get in front of the painting, you know, they're very flat at times, but then you can see there's literally like stuff's just like stuck on top and then painted over. So there is some sort of textural, like text, not text as in reading, but textural elements that are built up in the paintings. And there's a lot of transparencies and such that are kind of, you know, popping in and out of space in that regard, which I was really involved in at that moment. These are from 2013, I think. This is the last one was maybe 4 by 6 feet. This is 4 by 4 feet. This is a little 2 by 2 footer. And this was a big body of work. So most of these kind of chunks are big bodies of work that usually culminated in a solo show or a show or a group show or something like that. After this body of work, or right around this body of work, I went to the Bemis Center of the Arts in Omaha, Nebraska for a residency. It's a really great residency opportunity. And prior to that, prior to going, I had the intention of spending some time traveling to get to there from San Francisco to Omaha, because I'm from Philadelphia originally. I moved to San Francisco to go to grad school. I have not spent any time in the rest of the country, so I thought it would be a great opportunity to, really visit some of the landscape of the West that is so prominent in topic in my earlier work, and that I was feeling an interest in getting back to in subject matter. So along the way, I had a Polaroid camera. I was taking a lot of photographs of this sort of like the vastness of the landscape, and I think that I knew I wanted that to kind of filter into whatever I was doing next, and kind of makes work that was sort of about the landscape again. And that work culminated this was my second exhibition at Marine Contemporary, again, the gallery in Los Angeles I used to show with before they closed. And the concept behind this show was that it's titled Until Tomorrow Comes. It has a lot to do with the similar subject matters of the earlier work I was showing in from post-grad school that was sort of weaving in and out of my work. While I was painting flowers and stuff like that, I was still painting landscapes and things like that too. And the work kind of goes from left to right, day to night, from water to land, and each piece transitions some visual element into the next painting. So in some sense, it's like a large panorama with space in between. It's a little more prevalent here. You can kind of see how, the vines kind of carry over, and this sort of like neon trellis comes in and out of focus. And I'm going to kind of go a little bit quickly through these works, just so you can kind of get an idea of how each, what each piece looked like. So, I was bringing that experience of the travel from, seeing the Grand Canyon for the first time, all that kind of stuff. But, interpreting it through the lens of questions I'm asking in my work. As we mentioned earlier, I still do get to do murals from time to time. This was a large painting at the as part of the Facebook Artist Residency Program. This was in Menlo Park, and the headquarters for Facebook is on this really surreal salt marsh, and visually it looks a lot like this, traveling in and out of the space. So I brought that exterior view into the interior of the building. So it's not an exact one-to-one, but basically that inspiration of those reflected ponds, and there's this sort of like desert landscape, especially at this time. This was maybe 2014 too. There was a lot going on in the Bay Area with a lot of gentrification and a lot of anxiety around that. And I know even personally as someone living in the Bay Area, I had a kind of a bit of an animosity, I'll admit, about the gentrification going on, and watching my friends move, and feeling the stress of cost of living's increase, et cetera. So a little bit of like I kind of had the city in the distance, which is something I do anyway, but my mental political message behind it was just this sort of like the distance between the city and the space were so great, and just sort of like emphasizing that in a way that it's like, it felt like, I'm probably not articulating this well, but just that if there was a lot of politics going on about the busing of tech workers from San Francisco to the Palo Alto area for these high paying jobs, and they were basically pricing everyone out. So just this space between the city and this site is fairly a little bit of a hot button issue, I guess. And so it was kind of in my mind. I already kind of was painting highways, but it just seemed very apropos to kind of think about these things as I was in this space. I included this because this is actually at the Littman Gallery at Portland State University. I did a collaboration with Damien Gilly in 2014, and he invited me then to speak at Clark too. So that was a nice just little shout out. This was a really fun project to make. Damien's a great artist and a good friend. This is a bit of a shift too to 2017, so several years later. This was my second exhibition with Rena Bransten Gallery in San Francisco. I'd been working with them since maybe 2015, I want to say. And this body of work is a bit of a shift in that I'm working more with still life again, and sort of blending in urban spaces. And a lot of this had to do with, I was spending a lot of time walking around the city, and just really was gravitating to the sort of like haphazard gardens that pop up all over the place, and was documenting them. And part of my practice, in addition to finding images online and things like that, is just snapping a lot of photographs and reusing them for later, which which influenced and has influenced a lot of my earlier work too, which is, very kind of Bay Area-esque, but non-specific. I think I've often had people kind of look at my work and it's like, oh, that's Beijing, right? I'm like, no, I just made it up. Like it's like there was a sunset that inspired me and I found some photos and I made up this landscape kind of thing. So it's all very inventive, but based on being inspired by living here. I think is a big has been a big cross current through my work. This last piece, by the way, this is up at the San Jose Museum of Art now, the show that Michelle mentioned. It's up for like a year because of the pandemic, so it's limited access to it, but worth mentioning. It's in their collection now, which is a huge honor. This is another piece that's around 6 by 8 foot. The vines on here were a real technical feat, but if you can, again, in this one, some of the darker vines are cut out, collaged on leaves. So there's a lot of detail, a lot of layering and play on space that is really part of the in-person experience, I'd say. It's worth pointing out that the work looks very slick on a digital reproduction, but it's super handmade. I do a lot of very complicated stenciling techniques that I can try and get into a little bit, but I'll just kind of summarize it as that. But basically everything you're seeing is kind of created through taping out and masking areas and hand cutting shapes. So it's a lot of labor and a lot of layering goes into the work, which you can see fairly evidently in person, but on the surface it looks like it's just kind of potentially just like I'm not mixing and painting in a color exactly. A lot of the colors are made by blending glazes in over and over and over again to achieve a certain effect. This is a few more pieces from that body of work. Again, it's kind of like using like almost like the idea of like a planter and illusionistic space into a planter to create these sort of like funky spaces. And a bit of a jump to 2019. This was my first show with Hirschl Adler in New York, and this body of work came out about in part from a residency that I'd done at Cella Art Institute in Berkeley. It's a printmaking facility that they do artist residencies, and I got a fellowship there to get, basically they allot you time to use the facilities for free with a small stipend and an exhibition at the end. And so I'd always considered learning silk screening, and I've often had conversations with people about how a lot of my process has a lot to do with printmaking in a lot of ways. And I can totally see that and agree with it, but I don't have a huge history in printmaking. Like I've took some in undergrad and a bit in grad school. So I understand it, but I got more and more into it, and now I'm a pretty proficient silk screener. But basically these paintings are an additional sort of mixed media type element in them, is that there's silkscreen sort of blended into the painting itself. So this is I think 5 by 5 foot painting. And so let's see, there's certain like pattern elements or photographic elements that are screen printed. So they kind of blend right into the painting. And just on a technical level, like I would work on this big unstretched canvas and kind of roll it out on this big flatbed that had an arm to screen print onto the canvas and sort of, like position it and like screen print your area and like let it dry and then roll it up. And I'd take it home to my studio and unroll it and then work on it a bit more and then go back to Cella and screen print some other area and then back and forth. So it was this little back and forth that was going on there. And, thematically, this body of work for my first show with Hirschl and Adler was, it's taking this still life a bit further and using these illusionistic spaces as a jumping off point and blending these sort of, art historical references with, kind of cross-cultural, signifiers and with sort of like daily life, like plants and cacti and kind of things like that. So I was really just kind of exploring and kind of enjoying this this approach. which, which I started at Collage, kind of kept going. This is the SFO piece that Michelle mentioned. So thematically, this, it ties in very seamlessly, but, I got this commission in like 2017, maybe 2017. The project was completed in 2019. So it's the design that was chosen. I was working on this stuff 2016, 2017, and fed into painting. So, part of more and more recently, I'm doing more public art than I had been, which is a great opportunity to be working in this field more. My first professional experience was working with the Philadelphia Mural Arts program and painting murals, and a lot of my early background is kind of inspired by mural painting and public art. So it's great to be doing more of it currently. So the way public art works often is you're either chosen for a project or you are in a pool from like a city agency, or not agency, but like San Francisco Arts Commission, for example, puts out these calls for artists to be in their pool. And then when they have opportunities come up, they look through their pool and say, who would be good for this project? And then often there's an additional layer of competition where you have to, I was invited to create a proposal. So then you come up with some ideas, you put your best foot forward and you cross your fingers. And then if you get the job, then you got the luxury of working really hard on a project for 2 years, which is a great opportunity, but it's also just a ton of work. And this project was, so it's in the San Francisco airport. It's in the new Terminal 1, Harvey Milk Terminal 1, I think is how it's referred to, and what it's named. And it was a really big project, like a huge project. And the funding for all the art that got placed in this new terminal comes from sort of these 1% laws, which basically is like any new development has 1% of the total construction cost has to go towards placing art in these spaces. So there's several other mosaic and permanent material public art pieces that go in there. They acquisitioned a bunch of other artists by like Bay Area, like what's his name, Barry McGee, and all these other mission school artists are like on the opposite wall, which is pretty cool to be kind of near those guys. And this was a project. This is the first like project of this scale what I've worked on, and in hard materials, which is what you kind of generalize. It's made out of glass mosaic, hand cut glass mosaic. Thousands and thousands of pieces. And I worked with a fabricator in Munich, Germany, called Franz Meyer of Munich, and they are super old tradition, but they also are very high tech at the same time. So parts of the mosaic are CNC cut, like water jet, printed on material, and very intricate planning. So I took 2 trips to Munich. One was to plan and pick color swatches of the design. Prior to that, I had made like a half scale painting of the project. So like I had a big digital design, and then I painted it. And that image got taken to mosaic to become the basis for the mosaic. And you can see the painting itself on the right side here. And all this culminated around my 3rd show with Rena Bransten in San Francisco, which was sort of, again, continuing the thematics that I've been working with, just playing more with the multimedia approach, and sort of thematically revolving around, actually, I really thought about the mosaic, because it was the mosaic was being finished at the same time as the show was being put up, kind of planned that, do a bit of a double whammy. So they kind of tie together thematically. This one is 4 by 5 foot. This one's not in the show, but I really like it, and just thought I'd include it. And some of these have these really intricate backgrounds that are screen printed or painted. And just to kind of wind down, this is a project I'm working on currently. It's the biggest mural I've ever made. In part because of COVID, it is being painted in a really socially distanced way. It's a technique that's been around since the late 70s, early 80s by a guy named Ken Twitchell, who's based in Long Beach. It's painted, you can see the painting, part of the painting behind me. It's painted on something called polycloth, or it's called parachute cloth. I worked with it first in Philadelphia. Basically, I think the legend goes, Ken Twitchell came out to Philly to do this mural of Dr. J, the famous basketball player, and taught some of the muralists there this technique, which is to paint on this material and glue it up to the wall. So Ken Twitchell's work is like hyper realistic portraits and figures. And basically, because it's a perfect situation, because the Philadelphia Mural Arts Program, it's a great organization, and they do lots of work in classrooms. They do lots of work in penitentiaries. They take murals everywhere. And you can literally roll up, a 100-foot mural into a little tube and carry it with you to and from a classroom, inside a studio in the winter when it's cold and snowing. You can be working on a mural, and then come spring, you go glue it up. And the process is 100% archival. You can see several Ken Twitchell murals out in LA and around Southern California that look like brand new today. So it's a really interesting process. I could talk a little bit more about it around the studio, but so currently this is the design of the mural. It's 2 large walls. It's going to end up in Santa Clara, California, and the mural is being painted in part in Philly with some friends of mine, and then in part in my studio here. So it's literally, people are, you work on these 5x5 or 5x6 foot sheets, you tack up the artwork, you paint it, you roll it back up. And so some guys are doing background stuff, some people are doing foreground stuff, and then some people are doing, background and then mailing me stuff. So I do the foreground, and then it's all coming together, hopefully by May, and getting glued up on site. And there it will be. So that's currently what I'm working on from there. So I will do that. And good, the timing seems great. So yeah, I guess we can kind of segue into questions, and maybe I'll just do a quick kind of walk you around the studio, I guess, and then do questions. Probably makes sense. So I'm gonna back up a little bit. This is a couple of the sheets behind me. So this is a large still life. This one is one of the smaller panels. It's like 8 by 16 feet. And, it's right now the murals, it's like a bit roughed in spots. You can see where I'm kind of, this is like day 3 on this panel. So I move pretty quickly when I'm painting mural style, because you kind of don't put as much detail into it. And again, this is day 3, but the background was sent to me completed. And additionally, this genius, if you ask me, this guy in Philly figured out, a lot of people work on this murals in this regard, in this way. And he figured out, people are digitally projecting onto a cloth and tracing all the imagery out. It takes weeks of work. You have to prime each sheet with primer. The paint has to dry. Then you typically project onto that each grid mark of what you're drawing, and then you paint it. You got to usually like label each thing. So this guy figured out you can just print onto the primed cloth. So he has a huge roll of the cloth, and the mural is printed out. So you get this kind of ghosty image of your digital sketch, and it gives you this perfect starting point. So you can just go right at it and just start painting. So this guy is like a genius, if you ask me, because it just saves you weeks of work. It costs more in terms of budget, but then it's totally worth it because you save money on labor. So the material you can see is like very thin. It's like a paper. It's like the consistency of a dryer sheet, basically. And then I don't know if you can see the back at all, but it's just very smooth. It's a non-woven media, so that means there's no warp and weave like in a cloth, so it doesn't expand or contract with heat or cool. It's made out of plastic, so if you think about it, you use this heavy acrylic gel to glue it onto the wall like a wallpaper. And if you think about it, you're gluing onto the wall with acrylic. There's probably acrylic paint on the wall. The paper is made of plastic. The paint is made of plastic. So it's just like making a skin of a paint that you then glue onto the wall. And then the only difference is sometimes you'll see, you know, a little lip if you go really closely. And often once you glue them up, you just kind of like put a little paint on that and nobody can tell the difference. So it's like 100% like seamless process.
It's incredible. I just think
yeah.
that's so amazing that somebody was able to come up with this, like,
Yeah.
you know, because otherwise you're there, you would have to be, you know, at
Yeah.
Santa Ana for how long, you know?
Like months. You know?
Mhm,
Like
right.
earlier on in the conversation with the curator who asked me to come do this project, the plan was to do maybe some 50-50 kind of thing, like paint half on site, maybe some of it on this parachute cloth. And then COVID hit, and then we waited around for like 6 months and nothing was happening. And we're just like, okay, let's do it this way. And I was happier anyway, because you know, we're being extra careful. And you know, I was originally going to have a few people in my studio helping me paint this thing, but this just works out much better to have some skill from Philly. And also just on like a budget notice, like just, I don't know, this is boring to folks, but like part of your job, if you're working with a team, is budgeting and planning all this stuff. Like, you know, getting a good muralist in California is like double the cost of somebody who charges, you know. A couple of the guys that are working with me on the mural that are based in Philly have like over 10 years of really skilled mural painting experience, and their hourly rate, I hope they're happy with it, but it's like half of what somebody would charge here in the Bay Area with less experience. And so it's you know, a huge boon to you know, give work back to folks that I've known for a long time, and be able to afford the project at the same time, because it's such a big project.
Yeah, that's incredible. Awesome. Thank you so much, Rob. I think we'll
Yeah.
take questions. There are a few already in the chat, so I'm just going to start there. If anybody
Yeah.
wants to kind of like add more questions into the chat, you can do that. And we'll just kind of go through. We have about 15 minutes. So
Cool.
Sue, I see your hand. I will get to you after we answer Lisa's. Rob, do you want me to read them or can you see them?
I see them, but I don't know how far back they go. So maybe if you
Okay.
don't mind reading it.
Yeah, sure.
That'd be great.
Well, I want to start with Lisa's, I think. So Lisa asks, I want to ask about the pottery. So many cultural references with pots, and it's all mixed in with kitschy chainsaw bears, modernist, and Roman marbles. But the pots are so prominent. Do you have a love-hate relationship with pots or any other the stuff? Do you research historical ceramics much?
Yeah. I mean, I think I think about these things, but I also look at the elements in these paintings on a formal basis as well. So it's often about, to me, like finding contrasting aesthetics to go together. And part of the early kind of, I mean, maybe this is a corny kind of like United Colors of Benetton type of view, but it's like the idea behind the idea behind using these type of references started with the SFO project. And part the concept was representing a multicultural view of the Bay Area, which is I think there's a lot of pride in that locally. And I know it's something that keeps me interested in this area, is that it is a very, has a very proud multicultural culture to the Bay Area. So in representing San Francisco and that site, thinking about what it means to sort of like represent a site or be a part of a site, I was thinking about just sort of, you can't be perfect in representing everybody or anything, but I had this kind of idea of using different cultural and historical references in the objects that were represented to kind of create a sort of like patchwork idea, vision of those things together. And then I also just really enjoy how it works aesthetically, and that it changes, it sort of changes your concept of the relationship to those things once they're placed out of context in a way or something like that. Seeing like a beautiful ancient Japanese pot next to like a cactus or something, it just something happens in that process, I think, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah, awesome. I love it. The next question is about color and what your favorite color is. A lot of my students are here right now, and
Yeah.
we have been going over color this week for the first time. And we just did a whole lecture on the symbolism of color.
Hmm.
And so I'm actually interested to hear too, maybe what your favorite color is to work with, but also like how you choose your colors, and is there like symbolic, kind of conceptual content behind
Yeah.
your color palette?
I think that, I mean, my personal relationship with working with color has kind of gone through different evolutions. I think I don't have, I mean, like personally, personally versus being an artist, like I like blue green a lot, but it's not,
Yeah, there's
it's
a lot
all,
of
because
blue green in your work.
there is a lot of blue green, I guess. But
Yeah.
I think when I'm starting a work, I'm often thinking about the sort of mood or something like that more than the mood or like a spatial relationship. Like the painting that's behind you, there's a lot of blue, and I think I remember thinking, I wanted to see if I could create a distant silkscreen background, but using a really chromatic blue, like a really bright blue. Like what would happen, with that? So a lot of it's like, I think with a lot of art making, it's like, what happens if I do this? And then just seeing what happens. It's part of the fun of it, is just imagining something and trying to, see it come to life.
Awesome. Yeah. Sue, I want to get back to you. Do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, my question was, with the printing on that parachute canvas,
Hmm.
is there, the person who does that printing, is that a map plotter?
I don't know. I'm assuming it's just like a large, what do you call those? Just like one of those roll printers, like this big, you put the big roll of the cloth in there and then just hit print. I think like
Okay. Yeah, that sounds
like
like
a
a map
fancy
plotter.
inkjet. Yeah.
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 Another question was, does that parachute material take on the same mediums that your regular um canvas does?
Yeah. I mean, it's just acrylic. I'm painting the paint. This is the background is with Sherman-Williams exterior latex paint, and then the parts that I'm painting more realistically are just Nova Color paint, which is like and some golden. Nova Colors, they are based in Culver City, and they supplied a lot of the early murals that I did with the Philadelphia Mural Arts program. I think they still do, but they're just if anybody's curious about getting cheap, large quantities of acrylic paint, Nova Color is a great resource.
One last question. When you use that acrylic glue, does that
Mhm.
help protect it from the sun and elements?
That part doesn't. It just kind of keeps it on. It kind of like adheres it to the wall. Usually, you put on some sort of clear coat on top of the mural that helps a little bit. The artwork lives outside, so you can protect it a bit, but you can't guarantee its longevity. A lot of murals fade. Part of that is like trying to use good paint. Like I was painting these lemons, and I was remembering I did a mural with lemons in 2005, and I remember going back a year later and seeing that the lemons were like white. And so I just remember like, oh, I got to use golden paint on these, because now like that's like it's the golden standard for mural painting, is to use yellow golden paint, because the light fast is not great on the Nova Color. So, and then I think with this large mural, they've requested and budgeted for something called Mural Shield, which is like a super heavy duty graffiti coat. So that also has a little bit of UV protectant in it, so that should keep it from fading too much. But otherwise, yeah, the gluing just really kind of bonds it and makes it one with the wall. It's a really heavy gel medium, basically.
Awesome. Thank you.
Sure.
All right, so many questions. I think we might have to, we'll go through the ones that are in there and respond to those, but we'll kind of call it there.
Yeah.
Awesome. So the next one is from Eleanor, and she says, I would love to hear more about how you ideate and compose. You must have a massive photo archive.
Yeah, so I have a few hard drives with images in it, just because I can't keep it on my computer. But yeah, I do. Yeah, it's just a lot of ideate. I think it's a lot of kind of pondering and questioning and maybe sketching and thinking of what you might do next. I think. I mean, I think you could probably tell through the talk that like, a lot of things start with one idea and evolve into another idea. And that's sort of just, that's kind of how I work, for better or worse. And I do a ton of planning on Photoshop, basically. And then I do also not paint with Photoshop. So sometimes I use a lot of heavy planning, and the painting sticks really close to the original idea. And then sometimes it's like, I made a painting like that before, I know what I'm doing, and I just kind of go in, so it sort of depends.
Great. And then Grace, off of that, I guess it kind of is a good segue, but Grace asks, how do you create your sketches? Do you make digital sketches, use a traditional sketchbook, or maybe even use a 3D modeling program?
Yeah, I'm really interested in artists who do use 3D modeling programs. There's a few of them that I'm really attracted to their work. Was it Avery Singer, or I think that's her name. It's really interesting work. And what's his name? Jay Chapine, I think. I'm like remembering their Instagram handles. This is how the world works now.
I know, right?
But super interesting work that's made with like digital renderings. I'd love to get into that world a little bit more, because I feel like my work has this relationship to the digital and to this sort of artificiality to it that could be interesting to play up even more. But it's also not really in my wheelhouse, and I have very minimal amount of free time. So it's sort of on the wish list of things to do. So yeah, Photoshop for now. And that's kind of a big tool of mine.
Cool. And then Kyle asks, have you faced any unique challenges working at such a large scale for some of your pieces?
I mean, always logistical challenges. It's a lot. I mean, I'm fortunate to have a lot of experience painting murals. So it's, you kind of can anticipate what problems are going to arise. A big part of something this scale, one of the guys helping me with the mural, we went to college together actually, which has been super cool to kind of reconnect in that regard. And he's been painting murals consistently this whole time. So he's like what I've been going to for advice on what's the like updated version on doing some of this stuff. And it's always helpful to talk to somebody about these process stuff, because it always depends on the site, what kind of challenges it provides. And then sort of what I'm getting to is thinking about a project from install backwards. So it's like even when I'm designing the wall, what may or may not be evident from the design is that there's like, there's certain like seams or cuts in the wall. So it's like the design is, and there's palm trees through like half of it. And like I have to maneuver a lift through these palm trees to install my sheets. So like the design has to fit in a way where I know I can bring the lift up into the palm tree, between the palm trees to install the artwork. So, starting from that aspect backwards always helps to avoid some of the logistical problems that like inevitably arise. But it can keep you up at night, because you're always and I always like the day before installing or finishing a project like this, I'm just always like a bundle of nerves, because you're just waiting for a million things to go wrong. Which can happen, but it's great when it doesn't, and you've thought through, what the pitfalls are.
I think one of the biggest things about being an artist and being a successful artist is responding to problems as they arise, because there are so many problems that arise.
Totally.
And just kind of being prepared as best you can, but also realizing that you can't control everything, and that you just have to respond in real time and make it work. You just find a solution. Artists are problem solvers for sure.
Yeah, that goes from small to big too. It's like doing a small painting. It's the same set of problems. Just mural painting is you just explode everything in scale, bigger brushes, bigger amounts of paint, all that kind of stuff.
Right. Absolutely. We have just a couple more minutes. We have
Sure.
a couple more questions if you're cool with sticking around a few more minutes, Rob.
Yeah.
And then Ben apparently went to Tyler. I didn't realize that Ben's a professor at Clark as well, who's here.
Cool.
And he was asking about your influences there and professors that maybe you overlapped with, including John Moore.
I didn't know him at the time there. I'm familiar with him, but I didn't work with him at Tyler. I'm not sure if he was even teaching there when I was there. But so I graduated in 2005. I worked a lot with Stanley Whitney, was a huge influence for me. I spent a year in Rome abroad with him. It was like very big year for me in terms of developing the idea of having ideas in art and like what that's even about, you know. Susan Moore and Chuck was Chuck, I don't know if it was probably says a lot about our political terms. I keep wanting to say Chuck Schumer. His name is Chuck Schmidt. Chuck Schmidt. That's right. Chuck Schmidt. I haven't thought about Chuck in a while. But he was someone who taught. I was very into figurative painting in my early college years, and he is like, you know, he can paint circles around anybody with a figure, and he took me under his wing early, which was great. And Frank Bramblett, you know, he passed away a few years ago, but he was at Tyler, and I worked with him a lot. He was always, I mean, all the teachers at Tyler were just like tough as nails, but like always with love and like a lot of, just a lot of, you know,
Rigor.
Just a lot of rigor. You know, there's a big difference, I think, on the West Coast. I mean, I don't know how you feel, Michelle. I think
Yes.
a similar thing, but it's like, you know, San Francisco Art Institute, some tough teachers, but mostly a lot of just sort of like doing great, keep it up, or like, yeah, I don't really like that, and just kind of like move along. I think that the other students there were, you know, the ones that you gravitated to became just as important as your faculty influences, you know?
Yeah.
It's not to say there weren't tough faculty or asking tough questions, but it's also complicated because it's a different expectation as a graduate student. You're supposed to be asking your own questions and figuring the stuff out on your own, you know? So it's really not up to them to like push you along. You're really just on your own. And a lot of people just coasted and are, you know, not making art at all, you know, or involved in any way. So it's an art school. I remember hearing this as an undergrad, and just for you guys in general too, it's like, it's a great place to hide, or it's a great place to get something done. I think I remember hearing that from teachers and feeling like many years later, it's very true. Like, in, you know, maybe that goes for college and education in general. You can lay back and get by, and that's fine, and nobody's going to notice, and that's fine too. Or you can really push yourself and get something done. It's
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I love that. I think that's great. A quick note on East Coast versus West Coast schools, because I went to undergrad at Penn State, and then I went to grad school at SFAI, and totally the same experience, like very, very, very intense, rigorous, you know, undergrad experience. And then grad school, we went to the same grad school, and you could choose, and I did often choose the rigorous professors, but, you know, and I think grad school too, it's like a lot more about kind of what you want to get out of it, right? It's like you as a, you know, kind of professional, definitely going into that field afterwards, or hopefully what do you want to get out of it? And I think undergrad is more about building techniques and skills so that you can build on that later. So the rigor, I think, is really important for undergrad in a way.
Yeah, being a self starter or self mobilizer, I guess, helps a lot, I think, because that's, you know, especially for grad school, that's a lot of it is about.
Yeah. All right. How about last question is Kaylin asks about, let's see here, what originally got you into creating art? I think that's a great question to end on.
Yeah, you know, I mean, as a young guy, I was really into art. You know, I was just always been into drawing. I think like many things, like, you know, everything I feel like is a feedback loop, right? I wasn't very into school. I was more into like playing drums in punk bands and skateboarding.
You're a really great drummer, by the way. I'm a horrible drummer, so when I saw you drum, I was like, wow, look at this guy.
I used to be a very serious drummer, but it's such a part of my past now. And now having a family, it's like there's no time for that. But maybe one day. And I was always really good at drawing, and I think it, you know, got me attention from friends. And then I remember, I think in high school, some of my art class teachers would be like, "You're pretty good at this. Why don't you do it more seriously?" And then I was lucky enough to go to a really, you know, a high school that had a really good art program, basically. So I was able to take it very seriously there, and to more and more, and, you know, started doing like figure drawing classes on the weekends and things like that. And, you know, I got into Tyler right away, which was awesome because I really wanted to go there. And yeah, I think at some point I decided to go to art school, which was a big draw. And, you know, I even, you know, you think even in college, I was like playing in bands and going to school, and realized at some point that I could count on myself to make art and fall on my face. But if I was playing in bands, I was not finding people serious enough in the same way. So I just felt like I had a better opportunity to like try and take the art path more seriously. And also, again, in high school, I think it was, I was, from an Italian American family, and we go back to Italy all the time. And we were visiting Italy a lot, and I was getting really into art history and visiting all the Caravaggio paintings and starting to really understand art history in a really deep way and experiencing it. And it just became really something I was passionate about and serious about, and just kind of stuck with me. So that's kept me going in the arts.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Robert. Thank you so much for coming. Thanks to everybody for coming. Fantastic talk. If you all want to revisit this talk, it will be online at archergallery.space, so you can check it out there. We have a YouTube channel too, so you can check it out there if you want. And yeah, make sure to come back for future art talks, and check out Yulia Pinkusevich's exhibition up right now. And otherwise, yeah, have a fabulous weekend, everyone. Thank you, Rob, again, one more time for coming, and everybody else for coming.
Thank you, Michelle.
We'll see you next time. Okay.
All right. Take care,
Thank
everybody. Stay
you.
safe. Okay.
Bye.
Bye.